Hi everyone, this is Asim from Give Asia, and today I have the pleasure to invite Pat from Soap Cycling Singapore to be here with us on Meet the Givers session. Pat, welcome to the show.
Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you all, and glad to share whatever I can to help people trying to make a positive impact.
Great. So Pat, could you share a little bit more about how did you first get involved with Soap Cycling Singapore, and how long have you been in the sector?
Right. So my soap cycling journey starts back in Hong Kong. I was a MBA student at the University of Hong Kong in 2015. And so soon after arriving in Hong Kong, I started volunteering with an organization called Soap Cycling, which was actually founded by students, undergraduate students at the University of Hong Kong. And the premise is quite simple. We collect soap from hotels, reprocess it, then distribute it for free to charities throughout Asia, dealing with the wash sector. So promoting hand washing, promoting proper hygiene, sanitation. But really the reason it was founded was to give young people a chance to lead something. Most kids in Asia, developed parts of Asia, don't work until they graduate from college. So they're very smart, very good at taking tests, very organized. However, they lack a lot of those soft skills that we take for granted in other parts of the world. For me, and I've been working since I was 14, basically. And flipping burgers won't get you a job at Goldman Sachs, but it will teach you how to show up on time, how to deal with difficult people, take criticism, work as a team, and a lot of these soft skills that students in Hong Kong, Singapore, other places just don't get because of the pressure of the educational system. So when I showed up, it was really just kids doing whatever they wanted, and they actually achieved quite a lot, and it was quite impressive. However, there was no real revenue model, there was no money coming in, there was no real plan for how to scale up or maybe do different things. So I used some of my MBA learnings and some of my previous experience in the States to help kind of tighten things up a bit. And we developed a revenue model based on corporate engagement. So we started making money by marketing volunteer sessions, team building sessions to different corporates in Hong Kong, big banks. The good thing about soap is that it's politically neutral. It doesn't have an agenda. It doesn't speak a language. It doesn't show up late. You can bring it into the office, which is good for bankers and lawyers because they don't want to leave. It's just a very kind of participatory activity that anybody can get involved in. So that's kind of how I started. I ended up becoming the first employee of the organization once they started making money. So I served as the GM until November of last year when I stepped down. And then during that time, we expanded to several new markets, Shenzhen while I was there, Singapore in December of 2016, then also expansion opportunities in Yangon, Philippines, et cetera. And then here in Singapore, yeah, we incorporated in December of 2016, and then we just basically had students running it for a couple of years. There was no money involved. It was kind of how the Hong Kong operation developed. And so the students would work for us. They would, whatever they wanted to do, we let them do. It was kind of scary, actually. They had very little supervision. But then last year, one of our interns from Hong Kong, who was an NTU exchange student, he came over to Singapore after his exchange was done. He really built up the organization himself. His name is Jeremy. And we hired our first staff, we started earning revenue, and that's really when it's kind of taken off. We had, I think, 0 hotels this time last year. Now we have 14 that we're collecting from. And like I said, we've run our first fundraising campaign through Give Asia. So, I mean, it's really taken off in the last 6 months or so.
It's fascinating to see how these grassroots movements start by just a few students, over time evolve into proper organizations. What have been some of the lessons that you learned in terms of perhaps accelerating that to create more social impact?
Right. The soap cycling model is quite unique in that it's very youth oriented, and we create a platform really. The soap is really kind of irrelevant. It's actually just a platform for people to kind of engage other communities, whether they be youth or whether they be the elderly in Hong Kong. We started a work program for some elderly who were cut out of the job markets. But I think finding the right people, as I said, in Singapore, it developed on its own organically, but it didn't really take off until you found the right people. Yeah. Like I said, Jeremy, the board member, now Jackie, our first staff, they have really brought in their own energy and passion to kind of develop that. And also I would mention like strategic planning. So while an organization can be fluid and develop organically from the grassroots, it's important to sit down and really think about what are the key goals we want to achieve. These can change, and they always do over time. But if you have some kind of vision that you can push for, whether it's expansion in new markets, whether it's expanding into new types of, bottle amenity recycling or work programs for the elderly and disabled, things like that. It's good to have that in place early, like an investment. The earlier you invest in that, it will pay off sooner and pay off longer.
Yeah. And have you got any support from government grants or foundations, other sources of institutional investment?
So coming from Hong Kong, I said I was an MBA student. So my whole goal there and here was to be purely revenue based. We try to keep that as our main focus. It's more sustainable. Also, soap recycling as an industry globally, we're not the only ones. We're the largest in Asia, the one in Hong Kong, but there are others, and they tend to be more revenue focused. The reality is soap is not apart from like right now with the COVID crisis, it's not something people get very excited about. And we're just purely a middleman. Like we don't really distribute ourselves on the ground. So we lack a lot of the marketing material and data that could help us fundraise. And we're trying to work on that kind of longer term, but really revenue is the key. You have to think about what do you have that you can sell that people want. So that's our main focus, both in Hong Kong and in Singapore. In Singapore, we are a registered social enterprise. We're not a charity. Hong Kong is a charity. But as far as other sources of funding, of course, there is appealing to the public as we've done now. And we hate to take advantage of like a crisis as an opportunity, but sanitation and hygiene, hand washing is very important right now. So we try to use that as a platform to drive engagement and drive funding. We do apply for grants from time to time, smaller grants to help us kind of get some seed capital and fund up. Also corporate philanthropy. Dealing with the government, in general, in Hong Kong, we did get some funding from the government. However, for a smaller organization, I would just say it can be very time consuming and difficult, and you lack the skills sometimes to really deal with it. Across Asia, the typical funding model is you raise money from overseas, from like large multilateral donor organizations, USAID, DFID. For a smaller organization like this, one staff, it's not really possible to manage those types of funding. Yeah.
And how do you measure your impact? What are some of the metrics, and how has that metric evolved over time?
So yeah, coming from Hong Kong, what's easy about soap recycling is it's an output-based kind of metrics. You can measure how much soap are you taking in, how much other things are you recycling. So I mean that's good, and that's easily measurable, right? I could say, oh, I recycled 20,000 kg of soap last year. I recycled 30,000 kg this year. There's a growth. However, as we mentioned earlier, it's a challenge for fundraising because people see numbers like that. They can't really equate it with anything, right? How much is 10,000 kg versus 100,000? I mean, it's very abstract. So we do try to find more kind of personal stories of how the soap has touched people's lives, or how the organization locally through work programs or volunteering or student engagement, more qualitative impacts. It does evolve over time. We do see kind of the weakness of the output measurable. The reality is though, like if you're not distributing directly, then again, you don't have access to these types of things. We can always ask our partners. We distribute to hundreds of charities across Asia every year. They are all very time strapped and don't really have the resources. You can ask them for feedback and for photos and stories, but the reality is sometimes you won't get it. So that's kind of the challenge of balancing, achieving your mission, which is to get more soap out to people, but also to gather those kind of qualitative impacts as well.
Yeah. I'd like to understand the specifics of what was the problem before. So when you first began, most of these soaps were just trashed, like the hotels did not use them at all. And then now you found a purpose for that. Is that right?
Right. So yeah, very simple concepts. And also, like I said, we are not the only soap recyclers in the world. There's larger ones even in the US and in Europe. So we really just copied their model in some ways. There are many different ways to do soap recycling. You can do it in a large kind of industrial capacity, which some do. You can do it in a very small grassroots community way that we do.
Okay.
So yeah, we just sort of saw this kind of concept. The reality is like the very kind of inception of the organization was we had a group of students in Hong Kong. This is before my time. This is 2012. Like I said, a professor there, David Bishop, who teaches in the law and business faculty. Again, he noticed that these students just didn't have the soft skills. He wouldn't hire any of them if he had a company. Like I said, they're very smart, very organized, but just lack any type of soft skills. So he just came up with a list of different, type of companies and said, hey, soap recycling, you know, BCD, there's all these things. I will start one of these companies up if you guys run it, and we'll see what happens. So then soap recycling just won out. I don't know why. Somebody really likes soap. Yeah, the key idea, and then moving forward, in Hong Kong, they're a lot more developed with this, is not just recycling, but also kind of becoming thought leaders for hospitality waste, the negative environmental impacts of tourism. Before COVID, you know, tourism in Asia was growing, you know, 10% a year. It was responsible for 1 in 5 jobs created in Asia. So it's a very important industry, and it's very important for the long-term, you know, development of Asia's economy. However, it also produces lots of waste. And we can think about cities like Singapore, Hong Kong. They have quite developed waste management systems. Maybe they do recycle quite a bit, but they could always recycle more. However, in other places, like more remote locations in the islands in Thailand, Myanmar, and things, I mean, there's no capacity to recycle. I mean, everything's just thrown away. So really, the goal, you know, for the immediate term is to recycle more and to get more stuff to people who need it. The longer term goal is going to change that conversation. How can we use less? You know, not just recycling soap, but other things. You know, how can we make hospitality more sustainable? And that's key for the industry's development. Got it.
And how has the operations of soap cycling been affected by COVID?
Right. So in Hong Kong, they're still quite active. They developed a campaign to distribute soap to street cleaners. So in Hong Kong, if you're not familiar, there's a lot of elderly, especially elderly women who collect things to recycle. And they're kind of on the front lines of the COVID crisis because they're dealing with people's trash, right? I mean, it's a very kind of dirty and dangerous job. So they've started several campaigns to distribute soap there. Here in Singapore, we focus most of our distributions to the dormitories. If you're not, I mean, being from Singapore, there's a huge outbreak of cases there. There are some challenges in that the government has sort of shut down all operations of any non-essential businesses. So we had to kind of operate very creatively, like give soap to volunteers that could do it at home to you know, kind of package and process the soap. But we're doing everything we can to get soap out to people who need it. We distributed 8,000 bars last week to 2 dorms, one of which was hit by the COVID. And then there was a survey recently by HOME, the Humanitarian Organization for Migration Economics, said that 71% of migrant workers living in dorms are concerned about the level of sanitation and safety, and maybe don't have access to soap, which is something that we sort of take for granted. So we're trying to push out as much as we can, but within legal bounds.
Could you share more about your fundraising campaign on Give Asia? What prompted that campaign, and how's it been so far?
Right. So we historically, we did do crowdfunding campaigns in Hong Kong when I was there as general manager. Mostly they focused around raising money to ship soap abroad. And the Hong Kong model, generally speaking, most of the soap is shipped overseas, the Philippines, Indonesia, Myanmar, Cambodia. In Singapore, we try to distribute as much locally as possible because the Singapore government is quite restrictive on granting charitable status to organizations who help overseas populations versus the Singapore population. So we wanted to start this campaign, number one, to raise funds because a lot of our revenue sources kind of dried up. There's no corporate events happening. The hotels, their occupancy is quite low, so they can't pay for collections. So we really kind of saw this as a way to maybe get some increased revenue that we could maintain operations during this difficult time. And then the focus of the campaign is purely just to distribute soap locally. It's not to raise money to ship abroad. It's purely just to kind of raise awareness of the issues that some of these migrant workers and other communities in Singapore are facing, getting access to soap, staying healthy, staying clean, but also you know, economically. So I mean, a bar of soap costs money. People have to pay for it. So this can help save money. You think 8,000 bars of soap, you know, 50 cents a bar, probably the cheapest you're going to pay. That's, you know, 4,000 sings saved, which doesn't sound like a lot, but every dollar saved is something that can help someone survive during this difficult economic time.
So I'm at soapcycling.give.asia, and I can see your fundraising page. It's amazing that you are sharing pictures to update donors and also videos, volunteers, as well as that's great to see all these images, which makes it very tangible to see.
Yeah, we've been very impressed with the response. Like I said, in Hong Kong, we always focused on shipping soap abroad and saying there's a need. You know, maybe there's a volcano erupted in the Philippines. There's a flood in Cambodia. This is our first one really doing a fundraising campaign to help people locally. And so we've been very thrilled with the response. We had over 100 donors. So we've definitely been a huge help to us in helping us to maintain operations.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. What are your visions for the organization over the next few years?
Right. So now we're sort of in the phase where we had kind of the startup kind of iteration phase for a couple of years with the students. So kind of figured out what's here, what can we do, who can we partner with. Then in the last year, we hired our first staff. We started growing our hotel network. Of course, the COVID crisis hit. Again, good and bad. Good that we could raise awareness of soap recycling and sanitation. Bad in that it hurt our revenues. So the next phase, organizationally, we'll have a strategic planning. We do kind of mini strategic planning over the years to kind of set goals and stuff. We'll do like a full-on, maybe hire a consultant to really set a vision. I could talk about my vision. However, it is collaborative. We want to make sure everybody's voice is heard. So we'll try to, my goal personally, move into the recycling of other types of amenities. Like we do recycle liquid amenities in Hong Kong, collecting shampoo, bath gel, recycling the plastic, draining the bottles, and then distributing it all locally, sort of a milkman model where we refill 1 liter bottles.
Yeah.
So that's something we try to move into later this year if we can. Getting a space, we don't have our own space. It kind of hurts our expansion initiative. So that's a key kind of, we need the capital to do that.
Yeah.
Then work programs. So then we do engage a lot of migrant workers, injured migrant workers here with our charity partners to help with the processing and kind of as a source of labor. But we'd like to start like a paid labor program, perhaps for the elderly, the special needs community, as we did in Hong Kong to, again, the same idea as it's a platform for people to come together, participate in something that's quite easy and meaningful, and can provide opportunities for others who are locked out of the job market to earn some money, not a lot, but it's something, and help us with our labor as well.
Yeah. And Pat, if you could go back to give some advice to your previous self when you were just about to join as an MBA student, what advice would you give yourself?
After being the general manager of Hong Kong for 4 years, Singapore is quite different. I'm a board position. I don't get paid. It's kind of more, I let people here run things as much as possible, make decisions. I just provide advice, maybe a general push or direction, do some grunt work. But in Hong Kong, again, the organization kind of developed very rapidly after I started, and it's easy to get, the Hong Kong life is quite hectic. I mean, I work 7 days a week, work 80 hours a week. So yeah, just taking time, seeing like the prioritization. You always have opportunities, but just, nothing has to be done right away. Like always just take your time, do things when you're ready, not when people are pushing you to do things. Don't worry about the small details, these things that come up constantly to kind of, take your attention, focus on the larger vision, focus on self-care as well, and try to really make some time for yourself. You won't last very long if you but I know being an entrepreneur is difficult, and it kind of, you always have these things coming at you, bombarding you, but take time to really kind of focus on the bigger picture, yourself, and where you want to be and where you want the organization to be. I guess the key advice for everyone, like starting something up, is always just to survive.
Yes.
Like stay solvent for a year. Opportunities will come along, and you might have to pivot quite strongly. Yeah. Like I said, this coronavirus thing in Singapore, that was something we could never foresee. And we always thought it was like a huge, disaster. But again, it's had positive repercussions. We've got to run this campaign. The money we raised from this campaign is great. It helps us survive. However, we get to engage with so many more people, raise awareness, raise our profile. Yeah. So yeah, just survive and then wait for an opportunity to come along, and you can pivot a bit to take advantage.
Yeah. Yeah, and thanks for sharing your experience, and also I find it very insightful that Soap Cycling Singapore is a platform not just for recycling soap and providing this soap for people who might not have access to proper sanitation and proper hygiene, but also how it empowers the students in developing those soft skills and developing those business acumen. So in some ways, you are creating win-win-win situations for many different stakeholders. And I think that's really a beautiful model that you have there. Have you thought about how similar models can be created outside, just soap recycling?
Right. Yeah. The concept is quite simple. And then like I said, there's a framework. Like we had quite a structured system in Hong Kong, whereas the students would come in, they would get graded for their work actually as part of their curriculum at HKU. Here in Singapore, it's more fluid. So again, we get interns, they stay for a certain amount of time, a month, maybe 2 months, work on a longer term project. So I guess the key for any organization, the students are a great benefit. They're free labor in a lot of ways. However, they are quite difficult to manage sometimes. They're not fully committed. They're not getting paid. So you can't really, you don't have a stick to kind of beat them with here. So what I tell other organizations trying to engage youth is just have a certain framework, have certain goals, easy goals the interns can do. And then if they show promise, you can try to promote them. Like I said, with Jeremy, who was an intern in Hong Kong and then later became a board member in Singapore, creating that like path to become an advisor, to become a board member, to start their own maybe soap cycling chapter somewhere. We've had students who've taken the organization's idea, blueprint, and started it somewhere else.
Oh, great.
So yeah, creating something like a path. Not every student will follow that path, right? They'll have their own kind of goals, ambitions. They might not want to do it.
Great.
They get distracted quite easily. But as long as you can show those successes of people who have grown within the organization, that's I think very attractive to a lot of students.
Great.
Creating the social leader tomorrow.
Great. Lastly, Pat, any message you would like to pass on to the donors who've donated to your campaign on Give Asia?
Right, just thank you, number one. We've been able, like I said, we distributed 8,000 bars last week, despite the challenging operating conditions, but the funding that has come in has really helped us to scale up what we're doing to get more soap out to more people. We have another distribution plan this week for another 1,000 bars. So yeah, every dollar that's donated helps to keep Singapore healthy and clean and help the most vulnerable of the population to fight this virus and get the city back on its feet.
Thanks, Pat. Really appreciate you taking the time today. It was very insightful. I wish you and Soap Cycling Singapore all the best.
Yeah, it's a great conversation, and yeah, happy to continue the conversation anytime.
Thank you.